Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to my first video here on YouTube. Today, we're diving into a really exciting topic: Reddit NoSleep stories. I've added some anime-style visuals to go along with the story to make it a bit more entertaining and immersive. Let me know in the comments if you like this style, or if you'd prefer a different type of animation. These videos are perfect for studying, relaxing, or just getting a little spooky thrill. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe. That helps me know you want more stories like this. Let's get into it. I was a custodian at a sleep research facility. This is why I quit. I imagined pushing a mop bucket down vacant, echoing hallways at 2 in the morning. The squeak of the wheels my only company. I saw myself changing fluorescent bulbs in empty rooms. The hum of the ballast a familiar song. Simple, solitary work for a man whose savings were dwindling and whose last business venture had flatlined with a pathetic whimper. For the most part, that was exactly what the job entailed. But it wasn't all of it. Not by a long shot. There was one clue in the job description. A single phrase I skimmed over in my desperation. Capable of working with an unusual schedule and conditions. The schedule, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., was unusual enough, I figured. It wasn't until I arrived for my interview that the word conditions began to prickle at the back of my mind. The Cerulean Institute sat at the end of a long, unmarked lane about 20 minutes out of town, a place you'd never find by accident. It was an ugly, bone-white structure perched atop a grassy hill that looked like it must have been murder to mow. I felt a brief, profound gratitude that groundskeeping wasn't my responsibility. Everything about the place was clean, discreet, and obviously dripping with money. Even after stepping into the silent, plush lobby, I still wasn't quite sure what they did here. The receptionist, wearing a blue dress that perfectly matched the cerulean-hued furniture, greeted me with a practiced smile. She buzzed me through a sleek, frosted glass door and led me to a small, sterile office. I was wondering if I'd be forced into some cheesy, ill-fitting uniform when a handsome, curly-haired man in a crisp white lab coat knocked gently on the doorframe. He introduced himself as Dr. Narcy, and his passion, he told me with an evangelist's fire in his eyes, was sleep. He spoke of it not as a state of rest, but as the last uncharted territory of the human experience. He couldn't fathom how scientists devoted fortunes to the void of space, or the crushing depths of the ocean, when a third of our own lives, our sleeping lives, remained a vast, dark mystery. The best way to chart that territory, Dr. Narcy informed me, his smile bright and full of teeth, is through the eyes of those who cannot leave it. Seeing my confusion, he simply gestured for me to follow him. The heavy odor of disinfectant and the sight of orderlies in pristine white scrubs prepared me for a hospital. But what I found was far stranger. Not a single patient at the Cerulean Institute was conscious. Every last one was in some form of coma, tethered to the waking world by a web of tubes and wires. In a normal hospital, there's a constant hum of life. Hushed conversations, the distant cry of pain, the beep and whir of machinery as a backdrop to human drama. This place was deathly calm. There were no intercom announcements, no gallows-humored jokes swapped between nurses on break. The quiet, Dr. Narcy explained, was paramount. No outside variables could be allowed to interfere with their work. I, too, would be expected to move like a ghost. Looking out at those still, waxy figures in their anonymous rooms was the closest I came to backing out. The sheer, silent eeriness of it all raised goosebumps on my arms. But I was desperate. Throwing away a steady paycheck because a place gave me the creeps seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. The thought reminded me that Dr. Narcy hadn't asked a single typical interview question. He hadn't glanced at my resume. When I mentioned it, he just chuckled. "We've already done our due diligence," he assured me. "If there were any doubts about your suitability, you wouldn't be here. The only question now is whether you are comfortable with the environment." "We've had issues," he admitted, his gaze sharpening, gravely, "with employees who succumbed to superstition and quit unexpectedly." I forced a laugh, hoping it masked the fact that I'd been a breath away from bolting. He didn't look convinced, but he seemed to appreciate the effort. He placed a large, tanned hand on my shoulder and guided me back to the reception desk to fill out the paperwork. My first visit, I later realized, had been a sanitized daytime version of the institute. During the day, the staff-to-patient ratio was nearly 1-to-1. On the night shift, it was me, a skeleton crew of orderlies, and a single on-call researcher. The lighting was reduced to half strength, casting long, distorted shadows that danced at the edge of my vision. The doctors claimed it was to maintain natural sleep cycles, but I suspected it was more about skimping on the electric bill. All those machines had to run up a fortune. Then there were the closures. Entire wings would be marked off-limits, sometimes for days. The notifications came through the same clunky software that assigned my work tickets. Unstick window shutter, room 204. Clean and disinfect storage area, C. But I didn't need the software. The electronically sealed doors and blacked-out windows made it clear I was to steer clear. It gave me the unsettling sensation that I was wandering through a different labyrinth each night. And just as Dr. Narcy had warned, the place began to work on me. Scientifically, I knew the patients were alive, their consciousness submerged. There was virtually no chance of one sitting bolt upright with a scream, or of cold fingers grabbing my wrist as I passed. Yet, a primitive, unscientific part of my brain was certain it was about to happen at any moment. Those long tile hallways, with their softly beeping machines and rooms full of silent, waiting bodies, became the new setting for my nightmares. In them, I was the one in the hospital bed, paralyzed, watching a stranger push a mop bucket. I would try to scream, to beg for release, but I couldn't move an eyelash. All I could do was listen to their footsteps fade, like my hope, into the endless dark. The orderlies, however, seemed immune. "The fear is like seasickness," an orderly named Jamie told me one night, as we shared a forbidden cigarette out back by the dumpsters. "You either have it, or you don't. Me, I sleep like a baby. They're just lumps of meat, man. Don't let it get to you." Jamie was a big, stubbly, bald guy with thick glasses and a chain-smoking habit that dwarfed mine. He'd been at the Institute for 3 years. "There's the Institute, and then there's the Institute," he told me, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Take a look at the doctors and nurses. Notice anything?" It was a game to pass the time. The next night, I paid attention, and I saw it. About a fourth of the staff wore small, plain blue keycards on their lanyards. They kept them visible, but not conspicuous, a subtle identifier. "If you're gonna ask what it means, save your breath," Jamie said, when I reported back. "No idea. My guess? 2 types of research go on here. One official, the other not so official. Am I curious? Sure. But this is a decent gig. Pays good, no heavy lifting, and the customers never complain. I'm not risking it to scratch an itch." I tried to adopt his philosophy, but the blue keycards and locked wings wove themselves into my nightmares. Slowly, though, I settled in. I could put up with some bad dreams for a low-stress job. Things might have stayed that way if it hadn't been for last Thursday. I was under a sink in a staff restroom, wrestling with a leaky pipe, when a low mechanical moan began to echo through the facility. It wasn't the fire alarm. This was something deeper, more guttural. I poked my head out. Jamie and 2 other orderlies were in the hall looking just as confused. Then, a thin blonde doctor I'd never seen before and a nurse came running, their faces pale with panic. Both clutched blue keycards. We looked at each other. "Ever heard that before?" I asked Jamie. "Never," he said, shaking his head. I decided to head for the front desk. Maybe there was a protocol, an explanation. Lost in thought, I almost walked face first into the corridor door. I pushed the bar. Nothing. I slammed my weight against it. It was sealed. Lockdown. And I realized with a jolt of ice in my veins, only the people with blue keycards were still moving. Jamie was already tearing through drawers and cabinets, and it took me a moment to realize he was hunting for a keycard. I joined the frantic search, but it was hopeless. Then, the main lights went out. The outage lasted only a few terrifying seconds before the backup generators kicked in, bathing the hallways in an emergency lighting that was even dimmer than usual, and the color of blood. In that moment of darkness, the door's electronic lock must have disengaged. The push bar gave way. I was through. The hallway on the other side was identical, but the silence was different, heavier. I took a few steps, letting the door swing shut but not latch behind me. Halfway down the corridor, the hairs on my neck stood up. I sensed movement, a flicker in my peripheral vision, the ghost of a sound. I spun around. Nothing. It was like someone had slipped from one patient room to another, just out of sight. My throat was sandpaper. I forced myself forward, checking over my shoulder, the feeling of being watched growing with every step. I was nearing the end of the hall when the door behind me, the one I'd left ajar, slammed shut with a deafening boom. My heart hammered against my ribs. Just keep moving. I rounded the corner and froze. The thin, blonde doctor lay crumpled on the floor, her white coat a canvas for a spray of crimson. The nurse was slumped against the wall, unmoving. My stomach turned. I couldn't go forward. Instead, I stooped and snatched the blue keycard from the floor near the doctor's hand. Up close, I saw her throat had been slashed with something crude, like a shard of glass. A gut-wrenching scream, followed by the sound of a struggle, echoed from the wing I'd just left. Jamie. I raced back, the new keycard buzzing the sealed door open. The other two orderlies were gone, but Jamie was there, one hand clamped over a gruesome wound in his neck, the other clutching his stomach. He was trying to speak, but the words drowned in a horrifying gurgle. I grabbed a bedsheet from the nearest room and pressed it to his neck, trying to staunch the flow. The alarm overhead blared on, a monotonous soundtrack to the horror. Jamie's eyes went glassy. He was trying to tell me something. As his knees buckled and I lowered his dead weight to the floor, I finally understood the desperate whisper, "Behind you." I spun around. She wore the same blue patient gown as the others, but she was no sleepwalker. She was barefoot, her eyes wide with a terrifying fusion of fury and pain. A shard of broken glass, slick with blood, gleamed between her bony fingers. I threw up my hands, a useless, instinctual gesture. Then she hesitated. "You're not one of them," she rasped, her voice a dry crackle, as if it hadn't been used in years. She couldn't have been more than 20, but she had the pale, atrophied look of the long-term patients. I could see the faint EEG marks on her scalp. I pointed a trembling finger at my badge. "Custodian. I'm a custodian." "Get me out," she gasped, the glass shaking in her grip. I looked from Jamie, my friend, bleeding out on the floor, to this girl. She was a killer. The right thing to do was to tackle her, restrain her. But something in her terrified eyes held me back. "What's your name?" I asked. A blank look crossed her face. She didn't remember. "Call me Eve," she said, finally lowering the shard. "You don't understand what they do here, do you, Mr. Custodian?" A door burst open down the hall. Eve's eyes widened in sheer terror. Acting on pure instinct, I rushed her into the empty patient room, pushed her into the wardrobe, and shut the door. I stepped back into the hallway just as Dr. Narcy and the two missing orderlies came barreling around the corner. The orderlies held tasers. Dr. Narcy held a pistol.
"Where is she?" he panted. His handsome face twisted into a mask of grim fury. He explained that a patient had awoken in a violent psychotic state. It had happened before, he said, but this time she'd overpowered the staff. His story was plausible, logical. So why did every word feel like a lie? "I haven't seen anyone," I stammered, grateful my fear was genuine. "I was fixing a pipe, heard a scream, and found Jamie." Dr. Narcy's eyes bored into mine. I was sure he knew I was lying, but he didn't have time. His patient was loose. Warning me to stay put, he and his men advanced toward the locked corridor where their colleagues lay dead. The second that door closed behind them, I was back at the wardrobe. "I have an idea," I told Eve, my mind racing. "You're not going to like it." My janitorial cart had a large, black trash bag attached to the back. It was empty. It was also big enough to hold a person of her size. "This is insane," Eve muttered from inside the bag a few minutes later, her voice muffled. "It's like a bad dream?" I offered. "Don't you dare say those words." She snarled with sudden, shocking venom. "That's what they study. Bad dreams. How to create them, how to control them. They use infrasound, targeted pharmaceuticals. They induce nightmares. Then they wake you up and measure your T rating." "T rating?" "Terror rating," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "They want you screaming, incoherent. They want to break your mind. Think of the applications. Interrogation. Brainwashing. They told my parents I never woke up from anesthesia for my wisdom teeth. 3 years ago. They probably got them to donate my body to science. You're an accomplice in all this, you know." Her words hit me like a physical blow. The squeak of the cart's front wheel was deafening in the red-lit silence. It was so loud I didn't hear the nurse running up behind me. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "We're in lockdown." I put on my best dumb custodian face. "Nobody told me nothing. Just putting my cart away." He rolled his eyes. "Just stay out of the way." He stomped off. We were almost there. The double doors to the lobby were just ahead. I'd never been tased before. It felt like being kicked in the neck by a lightning bolt. I went down hard, the world exploding in white light. As my vision cleared, I saw Dr. Narcy standing over me, the taser still crackling. The orderlies were dragging a screaming, fighting Eve from the trash bag. They had been waiting in the lobby. Of course. It was the only way out. "You should have thought about the security cameras," Narcy hissed, his face close to mine. But don't worry. I'm going to enjoy putting you through our program personally." That threat, the image of being trapped in their manufactured hell, gave me a surge of adrenaline. The floor was slick with water, from a mop bucket knocked over in the struggle. I twisted free from an orderly's grasp and shoved my entire body weight into the cart, sending it careening into our attackers. In the chaos, I saw Eve break free and sprint for the front entrance. I knew it was locked, but the blue keycard was still around my neck. An orderly tackled me. As we hit the floor, I ripped the card off and slid it across the polished tile. "Eve, stop her!" Narcy bellowed. Eve snatched the card, swiped it, and the glass doors hissed open. The orderlies hesitated, and it was the only break I needed. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted for the open door, for the sweet night air that tasted of damp grass and freedom. The shot rang out just as I reached my truck. It wasn't meant for me. Eve's hand, which had just gripped mine, went limp.
She crumpled to the asphalt. I saw, for one horrifying, indelible second, what the bullet had done to her head before I threw myself into the driver's seat. I cranked the ignition, tires screaming as I reversed. There were no more shots. They didn't need to shoot me. Eve was their only witness. I was just a custodian, a nobody, with a crazy story no one would believe. They had murdered her to keep their secret, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to do the same to me. I drove home on pure autopilot. In the shower, I scrubbed my skin raw, but I couldn't wash away the feeling of her hand slipping from mine. I couldn't wash away the sight of Dr. Narcy's face. I thought about the gas cans in the bed of my truck. I still had my keys. I could burn that place to the ground. I slept for 12 straight hours, a leaden, dreamless sleep. When I woke, only the massive bruise on my neck and the phantom ache in my soul convinced me it had been real. There were no calls, no police, no mention of anything. They were burying it.
That afternoon, I steeled myself. I parked at a golf course that bordered the woods behind the institute, and as dusk fell, I made my way through the trees. I crouched in the undergrowth, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, and watched. But something was wrong. The windows were dark. The parking lot was empty. A sickening feeling washed over me as I jogged up to the main entrance. My keycard still worked. The lobby was vacant. The offices were empty. The patient rooms. They were all stripped bare. The machines, the beds, the patients. All of it was gone. They had moved everything. The entire nightmare factory. Overnight. Raising the building now would be meaningless. I quit that night. I walked away from the empty shell on the hill and never looked back. But I know they're still out there. In a different town, under a different name, the Cerulean Institute is still charting its dark territories. And maybe right now, some other clueless working stiff is pushing his mop bucket down its silent hallways, telling himself it's just a job, unaware that the person sleeping in the next room is about to spend the rest of their life trapped in an endless, screaming nightmare.